directly with Prime Minister Sunak. I did, and then today in the 2 sessions, and a lot of ground was covered. There was a lot of appreciation by all for the role that the United States has played. We are going to continue to stand with Israel's right to defend itself. And let's be clear and never forget what happened on October 7th, where hundreds, thousands, 1,400 innocent people were killed, slaughtered. Young people who were simply attending a concert. And so we are not going to create any conditions on the support that we are giving Israel to defend itself. I have seen, as you have, I'm sure, the images, the photographs of the loss of civilian life in Gaza, and it is heartbreaking. The injury and death to children. I have a friend who I talked with recently who has family in Gaza and has lost a number of the members of her family, innocent civilians. So let me start by saying that it is absolutely tragic when there is ever anywhere any loss of innocent life, of innocent civilians, of children. And there is no word that I can offer you that that justifies any other feeling in terms of the loss of that life. It's tragic.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Okay, everyone who's coming on here. Go.
As democracies, the United States, Israel, other democracies have a responsibility to do everything possible to protect civilians who may be caught in harm's way. And this, again, is a crossfire, quite literally, of Hamas's making. The fact that it cynically and monstrously, deliberately, has people, men, women, and children, as human shields, puts its command posts, puts its leadership, puts its fighters, puts its weapons, puts its munitions underneath hospitals or even inside them, schools, mosques, makes this incredibly challenging. But we have to rise to that responsibility. And so we will be talking about concrete steps that can and should be taken to minimize harm to men, women, and children in Gaza. And this is something that the United States is committed to. I'm not going to get into the details here, but it's very much on the agenda.
Pursuant to Clause 1C of Rule 19, further consideration of H.R. 6126 will now resume. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 6126, a bill making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the attacks in Israel for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes.
The question is on passage of the bill. Pursuant to Clause 10 of Rule 20, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 5-minute vote will be on passage of the bill, will be followed by a 5-minute vote on the motion to suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 798. This is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 226, the nays are 196. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Quiet them down. The House will come to order.
Let me get my cheaters out here. I think you all heard the President address this earlier today, but thanks to his leadership.
But how concerning is it that there have been consistent engagement with Israeli forces?
Obviously, we're concerned about continued attacks on Israeli forces there in the north, as are the Israelis. But I don't believe we've seen any indication yet specifically that Hezbollah is ready to go in full force, so we'll see what he has to say. We're glad to have the participation of all members of the partnership here for this summit, but thanks to his leadership. But do we advocate pauses by both sides here, temporary, localized, to be able to get Americans out? to be able to get aid in, you betcha we do. That doesn't mean that we're calling for a general ceasefire. Hang on a second. There's a difference. There's a big difference here. And we understand that, as I said earlier, humanitarian pauses have to be negotiated, and you have to have a credible basis for doing it in a temporary, localized way. I would also expect that we would get a lot of criticism from you and from your network and others if we just eschewed the whole idea of some sort of temporary pause so that people couldn't get out. I mean, we're doing exactly what you should be doing to try to look after these folks. On the humanitarian side, yesterday, an additional 55 trucks with life-saving humanitarian assistance, including food, water, and medicine, were able to make their way into Gaza via the Rafah crossing. We're hoping that the number of trucks crossing into Gaza will continue to increase as well. We know that 55 more trucks, which brings us to more than 220 total since the 21st, is not enough. And we're going to continue to work to get more in there. Increasing that aid has been a top priority of the president and a keen focus of his diplomacy. Each one is tragic in its own right, as I've said, Mary, and we're doing everything we can to work with our Israeli counterparts to try to minimize the risk of civilian deaths and collateral damage.
But do you believe that this refugee camp was a legitimate target?
I'm not in a position to say it is or it isn't. As I said, these are questions for the Israeli Defense Forces. These are their operations, and they, and only they, can speak to their targeting decisions and the way they're conducting the operations. What we are going to do is make sure that they've got the tools and capabilities, including our perspectives and lessons that we've learned in this kind of warfare as they venture into these operational decisions.
Would you still say it's obvious that Israel is trying to minimize civilian casualties?
We see in the scope of their operations that they are making efforts to try to minimize civilian casualties. That does not mean, and I did not say, that they aren't still causing some, that their operations aren't still causing some. They are, and each one's tragic. Each one shouldn't happen. And I don't know what the status is of how many of all Americans in Gaza are down at Rafah. I just don't know. That's a better question for the State Department. I do know, we believe that the vast majority of American citizens who we know are in Gaza are down there. But I can't tell you with certitude that there's not family members elsewhere that haven't made their way down or can't make their way down. The other thing I can tell you is I know the State Department is in direct contact with all the American families in Gaza. We obviously continue to be focused on getting as many Americans out as quickly as possible, and we still fully expect that more Americans will be able to depart. Hopefully more today, but certainly we're looking for them to depart at a similar pace, if not better than what we've seen. But again, I want to stress again, it's a fluid situation. Qatar has been helpful in getting those Americans out. I'm sure you would agree with me, and everybody at your network would agree, that getting American hostages out is a good thing. And Qatar was a key player in that regard. Qatar has lines of communication with Hamas that almost nobody else has. Now, I'm not saying that we support Hamas. Of course we don't. They're a terrorist organization. And Israel has an absolute right to go after them. But Qatar has lines of communication that not everybody else has. And it would be irresponsible. In fact, I would expect that you and everybody else in here would be going after me if we weren't doing everything we could and having every possible conversation we can have to get Americans that are held hostage back home with their families. If we weren't doing that, it would be diplomatic malpractice.
But how concerning is it that there have been consistent engagement with Israeli forces?
Obviously, we're concerned about continued attacks on Israeli forces there in the north, as are the Israelis. But I don't believe we've seen any indication yet specifically that Hezbollah is ready to go in full force, so we'll see what he has to say. We're glad to have the participation of all members of the partnership here for this summit.